Hello, this is Stacy from Scrum. Thank you for attending our webinar, Scrum for Hardware Agile Product Development. We invite two trainers, Anna and Stefan. Anna is Scrum Line CST and Stefan is Scrum Hardware Development Specialist. The last 15 minutes is for Q&A sections. So if you have any questions, please post out in the chatting window. We will collect. Okay, now let's welcome them. Anna and Stefan, welcome.
Thank you, Daisy, and welcome to everyone. Me and Stefan, we will do our best to talk to you about Agile Product Development, Scrum for Hardware. And we have a short agenda for this, and you hopefully can see it on the next slide. A short introduction, then we will go into Scrum for Hardware, how it's possible to use Scrum to manage and control hardware development, not only software development. The needs, the benefits, and we will also tell you a little about an offer that we have, a training class, Scrum for Hardware. And as Daisy mentioned, the last 15 minutes will leave for Q&A. So who are we? Well, we met a couple of years ago. We have Scrum as the main connection point. Me as a certified Scrum trainer, I noticed the last couple of years that more and more people came to my classes with questions about Scrum outside of software. One of those people were Stefan. So we realized that we had some things to talk about. And we started to discuss how we could spread this message to more people. So Stefan is bringing experience from working with Scrum in hardware situations. He is a developer. I am coming from product management point of view and adding the Scrum knowledge as well. So that's a little about how we found each other and why we're talking about this. So for today, we have a couple of objectives. And we hope that you, after today, will realize that even if you work with hardware and you focus on hardware, you can benefit from being agile in your product development. And we also hope that you understand that Scrum, with necessary additions, can be used to manage and control whatever product development we are talking about. We hope that you trust our experience and expertise, and that can increase your chances for success by listening a little to that. And of course, we hope that you will feel inspiration. We know that during 1 hour you can only dip your toe into something, and so that's what we're doing. Some toe dipping into Scrum for hardware. So, what is Scrum? Most of you probably know that Scrum is a framework and it can be used to manage and control product development. And when Jeff Sutherland put together Scrum in the 1990s, he was very much inspired by a great article in Harvard Business Review called The New Product Development. That article was written by Takeuchi and Nonaka. And they have said what you see in the green part here on the slide, that Scrum is not only about software development. It's indirectly about software development if you have software in your product, but it's directly related to leadership and running the companies that go really good. So by using Scrum to manage and control your product development and thinking about the leadership of your company, you have the opportunity to be successful.
And, actually, the first case study they did was from Xerox, where they built the first full-color copying machine. So that and that sounds like a hardware product to me.
Yeah, it surely does. And in the article that I mentioned, the new product development game, they also have other examples of products that they studied the development of, including cameras from Canon, for example. So even though it wasn't intended only for software from the beginning, it was used to manage and control software for a long time, software products. And lately, it's been more and more people talking about Scrum for hardware. So that's what we're going to do as well. So please, Stefan.
Yeah, so I need to tell you a little bit about how I ended up here in this bit obscure, at least when I started with Scrum for hardware. If you Google it in 2012, you got 0 hits. I started as a technical project manager at Sony Ericsson at the time where they built mobile phones and actually had a really big chunk of the world market. I will come back to that a little bit later. After that, I realized that the old waterfall models they used were not sufficient, and I had opportunity to try out new ways of working at a consultancy, a design house that makes hardware designs and prototyping for other companies. Those pilots were quite successful, and the whole company now uses Agile in the hardware development. I felt that this was something I wanted to spread since there was so little information out there about it. So I found another company here in south of Sweden called MEQIFY that there are quite a few employees down here, and all of them work with Scrum for hardware as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches. I had the opportunity to spend 1.5 to 2 years at Tetra Pak, quite known company, setting up Scrum teams there and helping them, and also, of course, learning a lot about them. Tetra Pak has now taken the decision to move their full R&D teams. All the R&D teams will be using Scrum this year. So they are quite far in their transformation. So why is it important to change at all? Well, the first thing that struck me was that in 2008, I sat at Sony Ericsson when the iPhone came. And the first iPhone came. It was really, really bad. The engineers got hold of one. They said, oh, the antenna is really bad. Battery life is terrible. And you can't send MMSs. So we don't need to look at it anymore. A year later, the next iPhone came, called 3G. And I had one of those. And I was the only one, including one of my colleagues, also a consultant at Sony Ericsson, had the phone. So that was a big tell that was a big tell for me that they were not taking this seriously because they didn't even try it. So the sales got up. Sony Ericsson, of course, panicked, and they needed a smartphone of their own. Well, the problem was that Sony Ericsson had this beautiful waterfall process that quite cheaply could spit out 20 different models a year with a 2-year project time. And when there were a disruption in the market, when the iPhone came, it took them exactly 2 years to release the first Android phone. They were not really prepared for this big change that happened in the mobile phone industry. And in 2010, I think Sony Ericsson went to 20% of the world market to 5, 6, 7%. Now they are called Sony Mobile, and I don't know if I have ever seen a Sony phone in the last year, at least not here in Sweden. So they were not reacting fast enough. We also see that we both have these customer demands. Customers are now used to having the new and shiny stuff directly, more at least. But this also means that the sub-suppliers must work in a new way. I can tell you an example from Volvo. Volvo is also moving to Scrum this year. When Volvo make cars, the car seats from their comes from a sub-supplier. That sub-supplier has a direct connection to the Volvo online ordering system and packs the seats in containers in the correct order, so that when the container comes into the factory, it goes out from the container and directly into the manufacturing plant in the order the car comes. So they really, of course, need to change, because now before they could make 20,000 seats, same color, and ship them every year to Volvo and everyone was happy. Now they have 2 weeks from the order of the customer online that I want this car with this seat. So before the seat must be in the car. And of course, if you have 2 weeks to react, you can't use a waterfall process. We also see trends that, of course, you also see with Internet of Things, where you add software and connectivity to everything. I talked with a big manufacturer in Germany. They make ball bearings for industries. A very, very traditional hard product, big stuff. They have now cloud connected sensors within the bearings, so they can tell the customer how if they need to change it before it breaks. And they are also using Scrum at their development plant for this. So, and this is happening everywhere. The requirement changes. There is one example is what happened now in Europe with the ban on that are coming now on plastic. It has happened in a lot of countries already. Sorry, can you please mute? Thank you. If you have questions, you can ask them in the chat, and we will address them in a short while here. So the requirements are changing around us, both from the customer that they want new stuff, like when the iPhone came, they found a new niche, but also from legal perspective, there is a lot of things happening. And all these things makes that the upfront planning, like you could do before of a manufacturing plant, that you could optimize the process for yield and for flow, that's not good enough anymore if you have all these changes happening. And perhaps most important of all, if you want to survive today, you need to be innovative when new demands emerge. It happens over and over again. Big companies, Motorola, who thought that Motorola would be non-existent 20 years ago? It was unthinkable. And this has happened over and over again. IBM, they are now a cloud platform provider. That's where they make their money. They built mainframes or typing machines when they started. So if you are not fast enough, you don't stay in business anymore. So what challenges do you face when you try to implement Scrum in hardware companies? Well, you face a lot of challenges if you implement Scrum in purely software companies as well. What's great about that is there are tons and tons of books and trainers and seminars and blogs where you can read all about this stuff. But if you start looking for, okay, how do you address aspects specific to hardware that software usually don't have to deal with. If you start looking and trying to searching for where to start finding a solution to those problems, you don't find that much. The last 2 years, there's actually some websites and books and so popping up about Scrum for hardware, but it's still very much emerging. So me and my colleagues here at MEQIFY, we have collected what we have seen in real life when Scrum has been implemented in hardware companies. And I will try to share some of that with you now. The biggest thing maybe when you do, or no, for surely the biggest change is in the people. We work with people, we don't work with machines. So when people have suddenly have new roles, they get a bit uneasy with that. So if you look at the diagram here, this is a very traditional company. We have the human leadership, the business leadership, and the technical leadership in a hierarchy from engineer to product manager. And if you read the traditional product management books, PMI, Prince, those kind of things, it says very clearly that the project manager is responsible for the humans, for the business, and for the technical performance of the product you're building. And I have not met the person that's good at all of these things. And my experience is that this one is lacking. You forget about the humans. This is fun, especially if you promote a lot of engineers to product managers. So this is usually not a problem. There's a lot of persons that want to decide the technical solutions. And there's usually a lot lacking in the business as well. So when you implement Scrum, what happens then? Well, we say that we dedicate one person in each team to take care of the human beings in that team, to make them perform better. We call that person the Scrum Master. We dedicate one person just to look at the business side of things to make sure we build the right product. And this leaves a big gap in the technical leadership. And that's what we usually call empowerment. If we leave space to the team will take the technical leadership. That's not the big and hard thing. If you leave space, they will take the technical leadership. I've never seen that fail. The hardest part is to get the product manager to move out of the way and either focus on the human leadership or the business leadership. So, specific to hardware then, two big common challenges we see is that there's a big competence diversity when you do hardware, because you have the software plus more persons needed to build something. Our solution is that don't invent anything new. We say maximum 11 members in the team. But we, of course, know, since we worked with hardware so long, that that's not feasible to have 100% of the work done in the team. So we say if we reach 80% of the work done by the team, and then we can have the last 20% as external dependencies. And how to handle external dependencies in Scrum I will come to in a few minutes. We also see the problems with lead times, since a sprint is maximum 4 weeks. How do you handle that? My personal best for a lead time And that's what the question I asked to Arne, where Arne maybe opened his eyes a bit. I had a problem that the test cycle, the acceptance test of a certain product was 2,000 hours. 2,000 hours, that's longer than 4 weeks. That's a full year of testing. So how do you handle that? Well, Scrum doesn't help you there. There are some things you can do. You can do rapid prototyping, you can do rapid testing, but you still deal with the physical world. It will take a while before you can 3D print the whole car, even if we are going in that direction. It will take many years before that is standard and economic to do. If we move up one level, usually we have several teams working on a product, especially if it's a complex hardware product. The teams are still cross-functional. We never set up one software Scrum team, one electronic Scrum team, and one mechanical Scrum. We always split it. Otherwise, Scrum doesn't work. So at the program level, you can see the complexity of handling many teams, and it's hard to figure out this middle layer of persons. So usually you need a system architect that's shared between the teams, that have the top view of the total architecture. It could be several architects if it's really complicated. If you look at the challenges on the enterprise level, the governance is a big problem we see, that the top management don't want to leave power. They want to be in control of everything and micromanage everything. And if they don't understand that it's better to push the decisions lower down in the team, it's really hard. It's also hard to get the message to the leadership that they need to change how they act as well. If the team are supposed to be agile, the top management need to change as well. We can't talk about changing an engineering culture if we don't change leadership culture. So, even though we have all these challenges, I have some good news. Scrum works. We have tried it. There are best practices emerging. So there are some things you can do to increase your chance of success if you want to try it. So let's talk about that. This is the traditional Scrum framework. Scrum says that this is exactly what you need. You should not remove anything, you should not add anything. And for software, I believe that's true. I've seen terrible examples of things removed from Scrum, and terrible examples where you add things to Scrum, like Scrum with waterfall planning. Well, that didn't work, of course. You could try to do Scrum without a Scrum Master. That's usually the first thing the middle manager says. Here's a person, this guy here, he's not doing anything. He's not building stuff. Why do I need him for? Research shows that's a really bad idea. So this is the framework. When you work with hardware, there are some things that makes your daily life easier. The first thing is that you should realize that the product backlog, as in Scrum, traditionally, is the only list of work to be done. And that is still true. But when you work with hardware, there's a lot of other stuff that you need to do. Maybe not that sexy stuff like getting the CE mark, or getting a box, or optimizing the box to fit in shipping containers, or fulfilling all kind of weird laws. Software, it's usually easier. In software, it's usually easier to get around this, but in hardware, if you work with that, you know that that there are these legal requirements you can't go away with. So one way is, of course, to have all those things in a separate list. We have a product backlog and a requirement specification. We have a product backlog and a risk list. In my opinion, that's not a good idea. We put all those things in the product backlog instead. Well, we don't have customer useful features in the backlog now. So that's a bad thing, but we only have one list, so we can prioritize between stuff, and that is good. You can still use stories in the product backlog if you want to. That's not a problem. You need to be a bit liberal with the who part. So the who part could be like a person in the team. So if I develop a new aluminum part and I need a corrosion test for that, and I don't have one, well, then as a mechanical designer, I need to develop a new test so that we in the future can certify this against corrosion. So that's the customer don't really care about this. But as an engineer, to be able to do A, you need to do something else before. That's what I call enablers here. So you can write stories in the usual way, but they will look really different. And we'll come back to that.
And one thing that you may add to that, the why for doing something usually included. Sorry.
Yes,
You're saying that we keep that.
Yes.
It's the who that we may tweak.
You can also, it's really powerful to use the definition of done in a new way. It takes a while to explain how to do that. I can't do it now, but you more or less use it to set the scope. So you have a feature, and the definition of done helps you set the scope. Okay, I have built it, but is it tested? You can use the definition of done to say what is the expectations for the delivery of this story. It's also really hard when you do a sprint planning to straighten out all the question marks, so to say. I mentioned that some of the works are done outside the team, and when you do the planning and you suddenly need something from outside the team, let's say you need a legal expert, you can't during the planning say as a team we commit to this work and to deliver it, because it depends on if we find the legal expert in time or not. So we have added a short meeting. It's more or less just a longer daily scrum. It's 1 or 2 days after the planning where the team gets time to check all those things out, all those external dependencies, and come back and say, okay, we have checked, it's feasible to start a sprint. Or we come back and say, okay, sorry, we can't get a legal person this sprint. We need to do a quick replanning. The important thing is after these 2 days, you don't change anything. Before the review, we have also seen the need for a focus point. We think this is because you are working during a sprint, you are working a bit more in parallel than you do in software. For instance, you use different tools if you are a software designer, electronic designer, mechanical designer. So this means that the integration of all these things happens quite late in the sprint. Of course, we want it totally integrated in hardware as well, and continuous deployment and all those kind of things. We are not there yet with the tools. It will happen within 5-10 years, I'm sure, but we don't have it there. Until we have it, it's good to have a focus point where a few days before the review, The whole team discusses. This is also just a longer daily Scrum, more or less. Discusses, okay, is there anything at risk to be not finished? And where should we focus our effort to get at least something done? When you start a sprint with a hardware team, I think all the teams I've seen have delivered nothing the first sprint, and that's usually quite good because they learn really fast. Okay, we delivered nothing, what can we do? Of course, they've done a lot of things. Usually everything is 90% done, and then you don't have a good review. So we see that it's good to have a meeting where we focus it. It also gives the product owner a really good view on how to build the next sprint, so that he or she can start preparing the stories and the plans for next sprint.
If I may comment on the focus point, you could argue that why don't we do that every day in connection with the daily Scrum? Why don't we check upon those things? Why do we save it until maybe the third and last part of the sprint? Well, we don't have enough knowledge to do a meaningful focus point every day. So we know that if we don't do it, there is a risk that all the parallel work end up in 90%, but never 100. If we do it every day, it may be in vain during the first 2/3 of the sprint. So of course, it's something that we need to learn when to put it effectively in our specific organization. And we see that there is a good need for it.
Yeah, and this is just a help for the team. This is a very mature team. If we look at the really mature team, as an example, a team I worked with, the commitment point takes 5 minutes, and the focus point takes about 30 to 60 minutes. But then they leave with a draft of the presentation for the review as well. So, but it takes a few years to come there. So our suggestion, if you want to succeed fast, try this out. And if you don't like it, take it up in the retrospective. It's also really impractical to have everything in the product backlog. Scrum says that the product backlog contains everything in a list. Things in the bottom don't have to be refined, but it has to be there. Well, you can do that with a hardware project as well, but it's quite impractical. What we have found is that it's easier to put those big chunks, big unrefined chunks, on a timeline. We call it a high-level plan. And what is the difference then between a high-level plan and a product plan? Well, the high-level plan guides the planning, but doesn't say anything about sprint execution. So when the sprint has started, changes in the high-level plan don't change what's being done in the sprint. A high-level plan is about one PowerPoint slide. That's the level of complexity we want in the slide. Everyone should be able to understand it. It should only have the really, really important things like shipping to customer. If you want to hit the Christmas sales, for instance, that's a really important date you can't miss. Maybe you have a tool ordering coming up. That is also something you don't want to miss. Maybe you have a test house booked for the CE certification tests. That slot you don't want to miss. So a few of those things, 5-6 milestones, a few tracks, maybe visualize progress, manufacturing, whatever you need in your team to help you do a good plan. So one PowerPoint slide, that's a level of complexity. Also, we need to talk about the increment in sprint and increment in Scrum. And Scrum says that the increment is potentially shippable feature. Well, if you do that in hardware, people can get killed. That's really bad. You can get sued really, really badly that's of course better than people getting killed. But well, you can't have a potentially shippable unsafe product. So you can't really say everything is potentially shippable. What we say is that a sprint have a certain outcome. We have a sprint goal and we have an outcome. That outcome can be a few different things. It can be that we have learned something, that we have added knowledge to the product. We can have added features just as usual. And the outcome can also be that we have built something, we have built a prototype. So the trick here is that if you don't have a high-level plan, it's really hard to decide, okay, how much knowledge can I add before I have to build? That's where the high-level plan helps you. And those two things work in tandem. If you understand what the outcomes should be and when things need to happen on the timeline, to plan the sprint. And this works really good in practice. So this is just an overview of the best we know at the moment. Best things you can try. We can't dig deeper right now, but Arne?
Yes. So this is a taste of what you may need to do to add things to Scrum and think about to successfully use Scrum to manage and control product development in general, not only software, but for hardware. And we have more to say about this, and we plan to do that in the fall in our Scrum for Hardware course. And what you will get there is what it says on top of this slide. You will learn by experiments. We will give you the theoretical foundation of Scrum, and we will also work with a case, an Internet of Things case, where the participants, you as participants, get to you get the case, you get to write stories, and you get to build a physical prototype using Scrum to manage and control that development. And it will become a very high-paced course. And that is to prepare the participants for reality, because reality is usually high-paced. Otherwise, we may not need Scrum to deal with it. And what we will do is to use this particular case to discuss Scrum, the benefits, the challenges, the opportunities that you will get, and also the difficulties that you will get in, because most companies developing products, they get into difficulties. We call this Certified Scrum Master for Hardware Development. So after the class, you can do as any other participants of CSM classes by Scrum Alliance. You can do the certification test and become eventually a Certified Scrum Master. That is a 2-day class, and we will offer it not only in Sweden, but also in China. So in October in Lund, the city where we are sitting now in southern Sweden, we offer it here, and you see some links for registrations if you're interested, or if you know someone who may be interested. Then a month later, we will be in Shanghai in collaboration with Shine Scrum, with JC and Jim, and deliver the class in Shanghai. And you can find more information on the Shine Scrum website about this class.
We will distribute, Shine Scrum will help us distribute this material after this webinar, so you can have all the links from there.
Yes.
From the
any participant of this webinar will get the details of what we're talking about. So that is what we wanted to present. We are trying to inspire all of you to try to use Scrum to manage and control hardware development. What you see on this slide are a couple of shots from classes that have been delivered already, and you see some of the things that you need to put together. it's going to be fun, and it's going to be filled with a lot of learnings. What we will do now is enter the last part of this webinar, the Q&A session, and we encourage you to enter questions on the group chat. And we have received a couple of questions already. So,
let me say here.
Yes, please.
When I see this picture, this guy here, he told us, well, you define and build a product, as you can see, and you do sprint reviews on it, of course. And on the feedback, he said that, well, it was a high-paced course, and we just barely finished in time. Maybe it should have felt bad if we didn't finish everything. And then I asked him, who said what you were supposed to build? And he said, well, yeah, we wrote the stories, yeah. And who decided how much you wanted to do in a certain amount of time? Well, we did the planning. Okay, good. Then you did a good planning because you just finished. So perfect.
That is also why we do it in this way. We want to reflect reality, where if you work according to Scrum, in reality, it's the development team that decides how much to bring into the sprint. And one of the questions that we have received is how many people can be in one hardware Scrum team? And then there is a follow-up question if over 10 is okay. And we need to remember what the rules in Scrum says. Scrum says that a development team should be maximum 9 people. Stefan mentioned 11 before, but then counting Scrum Master and product owner as well. Of course, we need to be practical about it. So if the rule is 9, you probably should not be 20. You probably should not be 15. And if you find it very, very, very necessary to be 10 or 11, that may be okay. But don't have that as a rule. Have that as the exception. And constantly do what Scrum is about. Inspect and adapt. If you make the decision to break the rule of maximum 9, then inspect and adapt. Continue.
Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons in Scrum and in group dynamics. And so I say if you can't stand around a whiteboard and everybody can read everything, then you are too many. Then usually you are more than 11 people around the whiteboard. Of course, this is a very common question, and it's a really good question because I get this question all the time, and when I go out, I see this as well. Hey, okay, we lacked a person with this skill set. We added one, and if you go to one of those teams, maybe 15, 20 person, and ask them how much of your time do you spend with the team. In all those teams, most of the persons have been part-timers. So then maybe that's the first issue we should solve. And when you address that issue, usually things fall into place and you can split it into 2 teams. But if there are many people in the team, the first question you should ask is everyone full-timer?
And of course, also, it's good to remember what is the spirit of Scrum? What is the spirit of the game? Why did we choose to use Scrum to manage and control software development from the beginning, or product development from the beginning? Well, it's because we see some possible benefits from doing so. And all the rules of Scrum, they contribute to the benefit. So if we break a rule, be careful about it and think about it. Of course, you need more than 9 people to build products. But we're talking about team size, not the total size of it.
I can read it. So we have a question here. In hardware industry, we highly rely on our suppliers, but they don't use Scrum, and sometimes they even delay the project. How to deal with this kind of problem in high dependency? And this is a really good and really important question. We will address that quite heavily in the class, and we will actually have that in the exercises we do, that we add dependencies. So, of course, there is no golden key we can give you. The most important thing, I think, is to have a closer relationship with your manufacturer and try to explain to them why you are doing Scrum, what's the spirit of it. Because if you rush things, they back off and say, okay, we can't keep the quality. I can do an example. My PCB supplier said it took 4 weeks to manufacture a populated PCB board. And I asked them why. Well, we have this and this and this and this, okay? What if I take responsibility for the quality control and you don't do it? And you build it, ship it, and if it doesn't work, I'm fine with that, as long as we learn something from it. So I promise that I will not sue you or go with my lawyers in the contract and say, well, you didn't build what we expected, but instead you promise me that you do it as fast as possible. So after half a year of work with this PCB manufacturer, we were down to 3 days. So that means that the electronic development team could design, build, and test the PCB in 2 weeks sprint. We went so fast with the hardware that the software teams told us, or software members told us, we don't need any more updated electronics. You are running faster than us. Then we are at the correct pace. There is always, I also mentioned the commitment point. That's a great way of trying to address these kind of issues. So you do a lot, 1 or 2 days, try to figure out it. But I don't have the golden key, but talk to each other. That's how to move forward.
Many times communication is the key, and many times thinking in a proactive way is also the key, and sometimes also elevating so that we try to optimize on a global level rather than on a local level. Subcontractors, providers, they usually optimize, and we want to optimize for the whole product. So if we can involve them, embrace them as part of the product development, then it's probably going to be easier. And you have seen in the history good examples of companies doing it that way. Toyota is an excellent example when they involve their suppliers in a good way, and they get them closer to the product development. So that's something to think about. And of course, putting demands on your suppliers, not pressuring them, but telling them that if you want to be in the race, this is what we expect from you, and have a discussion on how they can get closer to that ideal.
So we have a question about the Scrum course content. You can read more about what's in the course on the Shine Scrum website. Yes. On the links you saw before. If you mean the actual presentation that we use during the course, well, even I can't do that because we use experiential learning. So you will learn while you are working with it. So we take up things that happens during the prototype build you do in the class. Maybe someday I will write a book, but I haven't done that yet.
And then there is a question here. It says the big and headache problem in hardware development is 2 things. A, almost impossible to build the hardware in an increment. B, if in sprint 5 we find that there has some serious hardware fault, it's really hard to just add a patch and fix it. So how can we deal with these 2 problems, which are part of reality? Any good suggestions for these?
On A, you can build hardware in an incremental way. You need a different skill set maybe, but you can come along with just some imagination. I can tell you one example from the electronic design department. The first PCB I built was made out of cut cardboard because we needed a rough estimate of the size. The mechanical enclosure were also made out of tape and cardboard, but we actually already there. So, okay, we will have problem with our cabling in this product. The second prototype had cardboard with glued on connectors, 1 week sprints. The next iteration was a PCB without complete tracks, electronic tracks. It only had footprints for the connectors. So that means I could solder the connectors on in the correct location and have a PCB. It didn't work at all, of course, but it was still very useful in the design work. So you can do it incremental in that way. It's really hard to do only the power design, release the product, and then add a processor. So you can't split in that way. But there are certain ways that you can. So you don't want these big bang releases. That's the main thing. If you do a big bang release in hardware, it's expensive, and then it's expensive if you fail. You don't want that. So incremental is that you minimize the risks that you build the full thing and it won't work.
So whatever we can do to learn things early on, so prototyping, maybe simulations of things that we cannot learn until later on, and of course thinking in advance, but not too much, because if we think about everything in advance, we know by experience that we will still encounter difficulties that we couldn't come up with. So yes, there are challenges, and these are a couple of things that you may want to do.
This is why I've said a few times, we are emerging in Scrum for hardware. These are exactly the same things that were said when Scrum was started to be used in software.
Yeah.
So no, you can't do sprints in software. It's too complicated. There's a question here about modularization.
Yes.
It was said that about software as well in the 70s. No, everything must be in one file, otherwise we have too much risks with data going back and forth. If you look at the software methodology book from the 70s, it says those kind of things. And now, of course, it's not like that. So we are emerging in hardware to keep up with this. But the software had 20-year head start. So
yeah. And yes, it is more beneficial if the product is modularized. So if the product is not yet modularized, how can we move into a more modularized product? That's probably the challenge that you need to take on if you do hardware development when the product is not modularized. And of course, what happens is that you get the benefit if you have modules to replace stuff. Later on, when the product is delivered, you can kind of take parts out and add a new part instead of bringing in all the entire product and so on.
And one practical way of starting is to look at your physical interface. That's usually a good place to split. If there is if you have screws holding two things together, you can split there. If you have plastic glued onto metal, you can split there. To look at the interfaces, just as you look with software interfaces and try to split there. We have a good question here. If no potential shippable increment when the sprint is finished. Yes, I said that. How can we then get feedback and how do we learn? Well, all those really tricky questions, I have one good answer, and that is ask your team. It's usually best to start there. There is when you start doing Scrum in a big company, there's a lot of persons that are interested in what you are doing and comes to the sprint reviews. Usually it's not those kind of persons you want at the sprint review. So you should ask the team, and a good time to ask that question is at the focus point meeting. ask the team, well, what will you show and what feedback do you want? Okay, we feel quite finished now with the labeling of the product. Can you find and invite a specialist on that? Okay, great. You can get a specialist on that on the review. So the reviews in hardware usually feels a bit different. Yes, a review in software is you have discussions with customer or the customer representative. Is this something that's good enough to release? In hardware, it's more, okay, we have these results. What is the best value we can get out of this team the coming 2 weeks from what we have learned?
One thing to add, if you can bring back the big picture that you had before here, yes, and the pointer. So there are two things that I think you need to think about when we discuss this thing about potentially shippable increment and learning. So one thing is about the product backlog. What do we put here? What are the questions that we want to get answers to?
Yeah.
So that can be among those things. And to the right, outcome. What do we want to get out? What is the value that we want to get out of this sprint? And what do we bring into the sprint to get that value? Of course, in the best of cases, we have a potentially shippable product increment, and not always. So what are the outcomes that we can benefit from? So we kind of design the learning experiments that we do each sprint.
And you do that by setting a good sprint goal.
Yes.
Just one example that popped up was the sprint goal was more or less that we need a concept selection matrix. We need to decide now if it should be metal or plastic. Otherwise, it will be too late because we need to start the tooling. So the whole sprint was spent on making this concept selection matrix because it was so important. And that's very far from a potential shippable product, but the value was huge because we could scrap one track. So one team now didn't have to work on that, and both teams could concentrate on metal only. But you spent the whole sprint of doing that, and that was a really good decision. So you measure according to your sprint goals, more or less.
So one of the things that is true for Scrum in general, whatever product we're developing, is that you need to think for yourself. You don't get all the answers from Scrum. That's both good and very, very frustrating. It's good because we use the competence that we have within the development team. And remember the picture about technical expertise. It's on the development team, and it's frustrating because we have to think for ourselves. Yeah. Okay. So that means that we have answered a lot of questions that you entered into the chat. And we don't see any more right now, and that fits very well with the idea of finishing this webinar at it's Swedish time 3 p.m. right now, but in China, those of us joining from China, we know that it's 9 p.m. So thank you all for joining us. Please make a note of our contact details. You have them on the slide here. If you have inquiries, there is a mail address you can send them to. If you want to connect with me or Stefan on LinkedIn or on WeChat or Twitter, feel free to do that. And as always, we give lifetime support of our webinars and classes. So keep on asking questions later on as well.
And we learn a lot from your questions as well. The questions we have gotten today is really, really important. I have learned something. I have learned that China faces the same challenges as Europe do. I didn't know that. I'm not very familiar with China, not yet. So that was really huge. I also see in the questions you have the same kind of fears and doubts as we do here in Europe, and that's good. So that means that the course content is well tailored for Asia as well.
Yeah.
I'm very happy with that.
So that for us, that's kind of an experiment as well, learning from your questions. So thank you all very much. And if Daisy wants to say something as a closure, please feel free to do that. We will mute our microphone.
Yes, and thank you for your excellent sharings and answers. Thank you so much. To people who have more questions, or if you are interested in Scrum for hardware training, please feel free to contact us offline. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for all your time. Thank you.